Okay, let's begin. We're on Chaf Beis. For some reason, the lights are not working here in Kesser, so it's lighting is a bit different. Chaf Beis. We're at the beginning of the Gemara. Okay, and we finished off with this yesterday. There's this idea called Toich K'dei Dibur. Morning. Yeah, no problem. What's with the lights? How do you lights?
You're not turning them on?
No.
Rabbi, do you say we're still on like 20b?
20b, we're on the Gemara right after the Mishnah. There we go. Okay. Thanks a lot.
The timer is a little switch by the door.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about the idea of Toich K'dei Dibur. What's the idea of Toich K'dei Dibur? I guess the equivalent is sort of it's the framework of time. So, for example, if two, in certain sports they measure to a certain degree and not more, so to speak, the Torah considers something that was said within a certain time frame to be at the same time. What's that period? 3 seconds, roughly. Okay, it's actually 3 words. So beginning of Gemara again. Yosef Rish Lakish Kamed Rabbi Yehudah. So Rish Lakish was sitting in front of Rabbi Yehudah Nasiya. We said this is not Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi. This is Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi's grandson. So this is the author of the Mishnah's grandson. The Yosef Kamar, and he was saying as follows: Who should fisa kulan b'toich k'dei dibur? So we had first person number 1 says I'm a Nazir, and there's 2 other. The Mishnah talks of 2 other people. The first guy says Va'ani, me too, and the next guy says Va'ani, also me too. So Rish Lakish says they both said Va'ani within a Toich K'dei Dibur, meaning within 3 seconds of the first guy. Become a Toich K'dei Dibur. How long is the Toich K'dei Dibur? Kedei she'elas shalom. It's as long as it takes to greet somebody else. Become, and how long is that? Kedei she'elas shalom. Kedei she'omer shalom talmud l'rav. It's 3 words, as long as the length of time it takes for a student to ask his Rebbe to greet his rabbi, which is Shalom Aleichem Rebbe. 3 words. Okay, so it's basically only 3 people could become Nazirim at once. Amar Lei, so Rish Lakish responds to Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi, and he says to him, Tuv le'shafkes rafal talmido, you're not giving enough time. Sorry, this is Rabbi Yehudah responding to Rish Lakish, you're not giving enough time to the students. Okay, his opinion is that there's one more word. So it's Shalom Aleichem Rebbe Mari, it's 4 words. So you can have up to 4 people. Tanya Nami Hachim, we learned in the Brayos as well. Mish Amar Hareini Nazir. Somebody says I'm a Nazir. V'shama Chaveri, his friend heard, V'shaha K'dei Dibur, and he waited 3 seconds. V'amar, and then he says Va'ani, he says me too. Hu Aser V'chaveri Mutter. The first guy, the guy who says I'm a Nazir, he's a Nazir. But his friend who says me too, 4 seconds later, Chaver Mutter, he's permitted, he's not considered a Nazir because it's too late.
I'm sorry, Rabbi. Can I have the page position again? Are we on 21a now?
21a, and we're 4 lines down. First one line is She'ela Shalom Talmud. Actually, 1 line above that. End of the 3rd line. The Kama K'dei Dibur, K'dei She'elas Shalom Talmud L'Rav. How long is this period of K'dei Dibur, the amount of time it takes to speak? It's 3 words. Okay, so we have this idea of Toich K'dei Dibur being the applicable reference of our Mishnah is supported by a Brayos. Gemara says, Lema Messiah. Let's try to support this opinion. Misha Amar Hareini Nazir. Somebody says I'm a Nazir. Shama Chaveri, his friend heard. V'Amar, and he says Va'ani. So our Mishnah says there were 2 people present, and the first guy says Va'ani, and the second guy says Va'ani. V'Sulai. And not more than that, meaning that in Rish Lakish's opinion, up to 3 people could say Va'ani. In Rabbi Yehudah Nasiya's opinion, up to 4 people could say Va'ani. And our Mishnah says 2 people. So the Gemara says seemingly Toich K'dei Dibur is not only is it not 4, it's not even 3, it's actually 2. That's how many people could. So the Gemara says that's not a proof. In other words, the Sulai is not more than 2 people. In other words, our debate is whether it's 3 or 4. Not just 2. So the Gemara resolves, Tanaki Ruchel Choshev Elezel. Is the author of the Mishnah a peddler, that he has to go and peddle every single word? In other words, he said 2, and you should have, by yourself, you can understand that it could be more than 2 as well. 1 second. So the Gemara says, so let it say 3 or 4. So the Gemara says, Hachanami, it could have. The reason why it doesn't say 3 or 4 is as follows, because it's focused on the end of the Mishnah. Why, in other words, why specifically 2? Why couldn't it just say 1? Why does it, in other words, if you're telling me it doesn't say 3, it doesn't mean anything. It's just because he's not interested in telling you the whole thing. So why does it have to say 2? Why can't it say just 1? So the Gemara says, because if you look at the end of the Mishnah, it says, Hutra Rishon, Hutra Kulon. So the Mishnah says there are 2 people. So there's the guy who originally made the Nazir, and there's person number 1 and person number 2 that were matfis in that Naziris. So Hutra Harishon, if the first guy undid his neder, he went to a rabbi and had it undone. Hutra Kulon, then everybody else is released. Hutra Achron Mutter v'Kulon Asurim. If he releases the last person is permitted and not the first people. Okay. Now, evidently, there has to be a middle person. In other words, if the first person is permitted, then not only is the last person permitted, the middle person is permitted as well. And if the last person is permitted, the last guy to say Vani, the middle person is not permitted. And that's why the Mishnah needs to say that there's a middle person. And that's why it says Vani twice. Okay, so just to review this a moment. The Mishnah says, a guy says, I'm a Nazir. 2 people say, one guy says Vani, a second guy also says Vani. So you have Vani. What's the halacha? Both people become Nazir. In addition to the original person, it says already Nazir. Says the Gemara, there's a law, it's got to be done Tractate Nazir. We have a debate. How long is Tractate Nazir? It's either the length of 3 words or it's the length of 4 words. And the Gemara is explaining that our Mishnah does not prove one way or another. Okay, now we have another question, which is a very more fundamental question. So I should deal with 2 fundamental questions today. This is a very, very interesting question, is when each guy says me too. So you have the first guy who says me too, obviously he means I'm going to be whatever person number 1. To make it easy, we'll say this person, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, right? Reuven is the one who says I'm a Nazir. Clear that everyone understands Reuven's a Nazir. Shimon says Vani, Levi says Vani. Shimon's Vani obviously means I'm going to be like Reuven. What about Levi's Vani? Does Levi mean to say that I'm going to be like Shimon or I'm going to be like Reuven? So if you remember yesterday, sorry?
Yeah.
So if you remember yesterday, we spoke about what's the idea here? What's Va'ani? What does me too mean? And we said what it means is that it's a form of hatfasa. One of the ways to make Nidarim is to do hatfasa, to say this should be like that. And the key component of hatfasa is you need a dover hanodar. You need something that's prohibited by verbal consecration. In other words, things like another item that's an eder, something like a carbon or a nazir. Those are the 3 frameworks, basically. If you say this should be like a, Area 51, it's not an eder. Or it should be like a pig, also not an eder. A pig is not a dover hanodar, it's a dover ha'asid. Torah says pig is prohibited. Now, if this hatfasa here is b'dover ha'asid, meaning the first guy is a nazir, he has to remain a nazir. If the first guy has his naziris undone retroactively by a rabbi, turns out he was never a nazir. Turns out the hatfasa of the later people wasn't a valid hatfasa because he wasn't a dover hanodar. And therefore, the question now the Gemara is addressing is what happens if the middle guy has his neder revoked? Shimon gets his neder revoked. Shimon made a mistake. He was too quick. Whatever excuses rabbi takes, Shimon's neder is not valid. Shimon is not a nazir. If Levi did hatfasa from Shimon, Levi isn't either a nazir. If Levi did hatfasa from Reuven, Levi would still remain a nazir. Together? Okay, so that's the Gemara's question. One to his friend. Mitvus, Adilma become a mitvisi. The question is really Levi. Is Levi connecting to Shimon or is he connecting to Reuven? What's the difference? Latfuse umezel. To continue going. In other words, there's another difference as well here, which is that we said that hatfasa gives you have 3 seconds to do hatfasa, right? So if the hatfas is from Ruvain, then you have a maximum of three candidates, right? Up to or four. 3 or 4 people could do hatfasa from Ruvain. But if the hatfasa is from the next, if Levi is being matfis from Shimon, it's actually he has 6 seconds from Ruvain, right? Because he has 3 seconds of Ruvain and then 3 seconds of Shimon. And then this can go on forever. So you can have 1 million people lining up, all being matfis one from another. And there's no time limit on that. It's just 3 seconds of the previous guy. The become a mitafsi, but if you say the hatfasa is from the first fellow, famik the dibur lo mitafsi. So you have a maximum of 3 people, or as many people that can do it simultaneously. So it'd be a simultaneous hatfasa. In other words, the 5 people, Reuven says, I'm an Ozer, and then Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, Zvulun, Dan, Naphtali, whatever, all line up and say together, Va'ani, that would work as well. Sort of like an amen, like everybody says it together. But if it one from another, you'd have a maximum of 3 or 4. So Mara says, let's examine this. Tashma. Let's look at our Mishnah. His friend heard and he said Va'ani, and another friend heard and also said Va'ani. The Sulai, but more than that not. In other words, maximum of 2 people in the Mishnah. Evidently, that's because the hatfasa happens from the original guy, and only 2 people could be matfis. So the Gemara says, that the hatfasa is happening from the first person, from Reuven. If you say that the hatfasa happens Levi from Shimon, Shimon from Reuven, as opposed to Levi and Shimon from Reuven, listen tuva, it could have said Va'ani Va'ani millions of times. So the Gemara says the same response previously. Is the Tana a peddler that he needs to give like every single trinket is valuable? He just said the main point that there's 2. So let it just say Va'ani once. Why does he have to say twice? And we'll know that you can do 1 million hatfasas as long as they're one after another. So 1 second. So the Gemara says, "Tani hutter rishon hutter kulan hutter akron mutter bekulan asurim mechal dikem tzayim." Same response as the Gemara previously, because we talk about a first and a last. Evidently, there was somebody in the middle, and that's what the Mishnah had to say. Talk about the fact that there was a va'ani va'ani gives you a middle person. That person's Shimon. Shemhach tani va'ani va'ani. That's why I had to say va'ani va'ani twice. Toshma hutter harishon hutter kulan. If the first person, Reuven, was released from his neder, then both Shimon and Levi are also released. So the Gemara says, Rishon hu desharu. This is true if Reuven releases his neder. Ha'emtzai, but if Shimon releases his neder, then loy. Then Levi would not be permitted. Evidently, this is proof. Shmami na b'kama mitafsin, meaning that Levi did hatfasa from Reuven. And that's why if Shimon releases his neder, it does not permit Levi. If Levi's hatfasa was from Shimon and Shimon released his neder, then Levi would be permitted as well. But from the fact that Mishnah points to Reuven releasing his neder and not Shimon, means because if Shimon released his neder, then Levi would not be permitted. So this is proof that both Shimon and Levi are both matfis from Reuven. Okay, hold on a second. 1 second. I would say that the truth is it's really one from another. Because the Mishnah had to say everybody was released. So therefore it shows the first person. As follows. The Mishnah says if Reuven's released, everybody's released, which is true, regardless of how you learn, whether each one it does hatfasa from the next one or they're all from the original. And because the point of the Mishnah is that everybody's released with Reuven, it couldn't have chosen the middle guy, because the middle guy would not release everybody. Even if you hold that they're doing hatfasa from one from another, he releases anybody who did hatfasa from him downwards, but not from on top of him, before him. Okay, Toshma, next attempt is from the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Hutter ha'achron mutter v'kulan asurim." If the last person releases, Levi releases his neder by a rabbi, so then ha'achron mutter v'kulan asurim. The last guy is permitted, and everybody else is prohibited. The law achron of Asrai, because there's nobody after him. In other words, Levi is the last person in the story, in the Mishnah. Avlam Tzoi, but the middle person, which is Shimon, Shimon, who's in the middle, he has somebody after him. He has Levi. If Shimon would be permitted, then Levi would be permitted as well. And that's because obviously Levi is matfis from Shimon. And this proves that Levi is matfis from Shimon and not from Reuven. That Levi is matfis from Shimon. It could be that Levi really is doing hatfasa from Reuven. And what's the last person that we're talking about? And so when we talk about the first and the last person doesn't mean Levi, it means Shimon. The ayatana rishon tana achron. 1 second. In other words, so according to the other, if you hold that each one is matfus from each other, submission is very, very good. If Levi releases himself, Levi's permitted, nobody else. If you hold, however, that each one's being matfus from the first guy, so actually the Mishnah says achron, what does it mean? It means Shimon. Shimon's permitted and nobody else is permitted because Levi also did have hatfasa from Reuven. So the fact that Shimon releases his neder, it doesn't help anybody. And therefore, it's still, the proof is still, there's no proof in the second half of the Mishnah. Now, if anyone remembers from what we learned in the Durham and previously in the beginning of Nazir, you'll know that obviously it's chad b'chav and mitzvahs. And here's the proof. Tashma, the Tanya Behedya, it's a clear brisa. Putter Harishan, the first guy releases himself. Putter Kulam, they're all released. Putter Achron, the last guy releases himself. Achron Mutter, the last person's released. The Kulan assume the rest of them are prohibited. What about Hutter and Tzai? If the middle guy is released, it's very clear. Hey menu ulamata mutter. Him and anyone after him is permitted. Ulamala, but before him also you're prohibited. Ushmamina chad b'chavre matves shmamina. This proves that each person does hatfasa one from another. It's a hatfasa chain, and this is clear evidence that it is that hatfasa happens one from another. We had a very similar in the Durham as well, similar Gemara about neder, and same thing. It's chad b'chavre mitzvahs. It's interesting. I believe in the Durham the Gemara does not question. The Gemara doesn't even ask this question. I think it's a clear Mishnah, and I think the Gemara what? It's a Mishnah. I think Gemara doesn't question it. Okay, so in summary, the second part of the Gemara today was basically a question of whether hatfasa happens from the first guy or from the or one from another. It's a hatfasa chain. Point to two differences. Difference number one is if it's a hatfasa chain, the time scale is technically infinite. If you have 100 people, it's 100 units of 3 seconds. 3 seconds after each person, and you could do 100 people could become a Nazir in one chain. Whereas if it's hatfasa from the first person, then you have a maximum of 3 people one after another, 3 one after another statements, maybe 4 according to Rabbi Yehudah. And the Gemara concludes that chad b'chavre mitzvahs because it's clear brisa that says exactly that. Okay. Next Gemara. Okay, so we learned in the Mishnah. Okay, we learned in the Mishnah a few interesting scenarios with a husband basically together with his wife accepting a Nazirus. And in some scenarios, the husband is able to nullify his wife's Nazirus, and in some scenarios he can't. Let's review quickly here. 1 second. Okay, so he says, I'm a Nazir. And then his wife says, I'm also a Nazir. He can nullify his wife's vows. His wife says, I'm a Nazir. And he says, I'm a Nazir. He cannot nullify his wife's vows. Why not? We'll have to see. 1 second. Alternatively, he says, I'm a Nazir. What about you? She says, Amen. I'm a Nazir. He can nullify her vow. Let's say the opposite happens. She says, I'm a Nazir. What about you? 1 second. And he says, Amen. He affirms it for himself. He affirms it for his wife too. And he also cannot nullify his wife's neder. His wife's Nazirus. Okay. Oh, we'll skip one more Gemara. We'll get to it in a moment. Okay, we'll skip the Gemara. The Gemara says, If a guy says I'm a Nazir, he says my mouth is like your mouth, my hair is like your hair. So he touches two of the prohibitions of Nazir. Drinking wine and cutting hair. The third prohibition, obviously, is Tumah. The Mishnah says he becomes a Nazir. Shouldn't Amar Pikapi V'Sar Gesar raise a Nazir? Top of Chaf Alpha Mebez. 21b. V'Raminu, I'll ask you a question. Yodai Nazira, V'Ragli Nazir. My hand should be a Nazir. My foot should be a Nazir. Le'Amar Klum, it's a meaningless statement. Roishi Nazira, Kvedi Nazira. Okay, so obviously you can survive, certainly in the short term and probably in the longer term as well, without a hand or a foot. But if you say my head should be a Nazir, my liver should be a Nazir, these are organs you cannot survive. Livers, for any short amount of time, you can't survive without a liver. I raise a Nazir, he is a Nazir. Okay, and the critical Zaklal, this is the general rule. If you say that an organ which is necessary for maintenance of life support, it should be a Nazir, then you become a Nazir. But if it's a non-critical organ, you say my spleen should be a Nazir, or appendix, that's not going to work. Okay. As an aside, it's interesting when in Israel, so if you have the firstborn animal, it's going to be brought as a korban, unless you sell one of these organs to a non-Jew. If the non-Jew is a partnership in a life-critical organ, then the child of that animal, the firstborn child, does not have the sanctity of a korban. So this happens all the time in Israel. Whenever there's an animal that's pregnant, first pregnancy, if you know it's a first pregnancy, and obviously that means you raised it until it became mature. They typically sell the esophagus and the trachea because they're worthless organs, but they're life critical. You can't live without them. So and this way, the child that's born is considered it's not considered it's not obligated. It's not sanctified as a korban. Okay. So Amar of Yehudah. So Yehudah says the Amar Hachi. This was a statement. He didn't say, in other words, how do you resolve this question? He didn't say my ear or my mouth. He said Yasa Pikapiv miyayin. My mouth should be like his mouth from wine. So basically, he specified Naziris. The sari kisari mi logos. My hair like his hair from cutting here, from the prohibition of cutting hair on Nazir. Now, this obviously he identified only two of the three prohibitions of Nazir. If you remember, we had the rule of Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says you need to do all three. So Taisa says, what happened here? You're only identifying two of the three prohibitions of Nazir. You should not be a Nazir. So Taisa says this is a different methodology. This is a concept of Yodis Naziris. So Yodis, we said, is a statement that's clear. His intentions are clear, even if the statement itself doesn't carry enough verbalization to understand what he's clearly talking about. Over here, he's obviously referencing Nazir. And it's considered a Yad Naziris as if he accepted the whole thing, even though he didn't identify all three areas of Nazir. Okay, next Gemara. Okay, so now we have the question of the husband and the wife, the husband nullifying the wife's Naziris. Question. This is not really a question. The Gemara has addressed this in the past. We've come to a clear resolution, but for now it's a question. In Nedarim, by the way, the Gemara did not even consider this a question. The Gemara never asked this question in Nedarim. I believe. It's in Nedarim. The Gemara has a resolution there. Baal me'ekar okar idilma megas gaius. Does the husband retroactively nullify the vow, or does he henceforth make it useless? In the article terminology, he abrogates it. It's an abrogation or it's a retroactive revocation. Okay, and l'may nafkamina, what's the difference? As follows: each shenadra b'nazir, a woman who accepts to become a nazir, v'shama chavarta, and her friend heard, va'omer, and she says, va'ani, I'm also nazir. V'shama ba'ala, and the so you have woman number one, right? So I don't like using any real woman's names, so we'll call them Shprinza and Yenta, right? So Shprinza and Yenta, Yiddish names. I'm sure nobody has those names. Okay. Or
somebody has.
We'll go Beatrice and Brooklyn. Okay. Okay. So Beatrice accepts Naziris, and Brooklyn says, "Me too. I'm also Nazir." Okay, and Beatrice's husband nullifies her vow. Now the question is, what's the status of Brooklyn? Right? Is she also a Nazir? If the husband retroactively revokes the neder, So then there's no hatfasa, because the first woman is not a davar hanoder, right? But if the husband abrogates it henceforth, so then she was a nazir at the time, the hatfasa was a valid hatfasa, and therefore the second woman remains a nazir. If you say the husband revokes it retroactively, just like a rabbi would, then the woman is permitted, as the second woman is permitted. But if you say the husband abrogates it henceforth, so the first woman Beatrice would be permitted. She's not a nazir, and Brooklyn would be prohibited. She remains a nazir. So let's examine this. We'll go through today's worth of proofs, and we'll continue this tomorrow as well. So we're not going to finish today. Toshma, first proof. Our Mishnah, Hareini Nazira. A woman says, I should be a nazir. B'shama Ba'ala, her husband says, Va'amar, and he says, Va'ani, I'm also a nazir. Eini yachal lahafer. He cannot nullify the vow. Okay, why not? So let's see the Gemara, and we'll go through each proposition here. Okay, as follows. We said, we spoke about this a little bit yesterday at the end. The pasuk says that a person is not allowed to nullify his own vow. That's a coded reference that a rabbi could nullify her vow. But the Gemara presumes here that not only that because you can't nullify your own vow, that means that technically speaking, you can't end up nullifying your vow. So if the husband nullifies his wife's nazirus, and he was matfis his own nazirus off of his wife, so that's considered nullifying his own vow. Taisus takes a little bit of issue. Taisus is not convinced by this argument. He has a little bit of a variation on this. Be that as it may. So if you hold me'eker akar, he holds that it revokes it retroactively. So the husband, in effect, is nullifying his own nazirus. So therefore, it makes sense that he can't nullify it. But if you say megas gaias, that he abrogates it henceforth, so he's just getting rid of his wife's nether. He's still a nazir. So why can't he nullify it? What's the problem? So this must be a proof. Shmamina bal me'eker akar. He retroactively revokes his wife's nether. So the Gemara says no, not convincing. Loy megas gaias. It could even be a scenario where he abrogates it henceforth. And the truth is, he should be able to nullify it. So why can't he nullify his wife's vow? Even the Amar Lava Ani, command Amar Kayam Lechi Domi. Basically saying Va'ani, supporting his wife's neder, is in effect by doing hatfasa from his wife's neder, is in effect validating it. So if he undoes his validation, he regrets his validation, same day by the way, then Motzi Mefer, then he can undo his neder, then he can nullify his wife's vow, and the truth of the matter is he could nullify her vow. The Eloi Motzi Mefer, but if not, he can't nullify it. So the problem here is not because what he's doing to himself, but the fact is hatfasa from your wife's neder is in effect a validation of it. It's a hakama, and therefore you can't nullify it. Okay, next proof. Toshma, also from our Mishnah. Ha'isha shenadra benazir. I'm sorry, no, this is okay. This is a slight variation of the Gemara we've seen previously. Let's see it first, and the Gemara will bring two versions of a similar brayso. Ha'isha shenadra benazir, a woman who accepts to become a nazir. V'hifrisha es behemta. She's preparing to conclude her nazirus. Conclude nazirus with 3 karbanos, a chatos, an ashram, and an ayla. I'm sorry, chatos, a shlom, and an ayla. Tuma is a chatos, ashram, and an ayla. So she separates her sacrifices. She's getting ready to end her nazirus. And then the husband nullifies the nazirus. Okay, so the question is, whose sacrifices were they? If they were the husband's animals, so then the woman is allowed to use her husband's animals to bring her sacrifices to the extent that she's obligated to bring them. If she's not obligated to bring her sacrifices because she nullified her vow, so then they're not sanctified at all. In other words, it turns out retroactively that she never needed to bring them. She had no right to take her husband's animals. Her husband's animals are only hers insofar that she has to bring them. In this case, she doesn't have to bring them. They're not hers. They never were her. They belong to her husband. She had no right to consecrate them. So therefore, they're chulin. They're not sanctified. Okay. So that one's easy. In other words, because the entire permission she has from her husband, it doesn't have to be retroactive. It could be henceforth. If she will result in not if her net result is that she doesn't have to bring them, she had no right to take them from her husband. Okay, what happens? So that makes sense. They're chulin. The im shalohai. So what happens if they were her animals? So in that case, she thought she was going to have to bring a korban. So they were rightly sanctified. So a chatos, if the chatos tomos, a chatos in general, a korban chatos that cannot be brought is killed. The korban oil that can't be brought, you wait till it gets a moment, you redeem it, and you bring a different oil. Because the chatos can only be brought for a specific person for a specific purpose. So there's no second chance at chatos. If you can't use it, you kill it. Okay. So the chatos tomos. And the other animals, the oil and the shlomim, you can wait till it gets a mum, let it pass through the field until it breaks a bone, and then you can sell it and use that money to buy another oil and shlomim and bring that. Okay, the isak the palmi, but if you say the husband nullifies the neder retroactively, typically chulin, all the animals should go to chulin because you sanctified them based on an obligation to bring 3 sacrifices. A chatos, a shlom, and an oila. And now it turns out retroactively, you never even had an obligation. So you can't sanctify a chatos for no reason. So therefore, it should go out l'chulin. El lav shmamina, it must be bal megas gayas. The husband's able to abrogate a neder henceforth, and that's why the animals stay sanctified. Okay, so Gemara says no. Truth of the matter is the husband abrogates it henceforth. The hainu taima. And in this scenario, why is it that the chatos, the korban chatos, is still sanctified? Okay, so there's 2 versions of the Gemara here. I'll go with the text that we have, and then we'll go with Tosfos. Behind the time, since she was supposed to bring a chatos, turns out she doesn't need to bring it. It's as if somebody was supposed to bring a korban chatos. He turned on the light on Shabbos. He thought it was Sunday. Classical scenario where he brings a korban chatos. And then he dies. So he can't bring it because who's going to bring it? He's dead. So the Gemara says, and we learned the chatos shemeis bala Thomas. The chatos, who the person who's supposed to bring it dies, the chatos can't be brought, and therefore it's killed. So too here as well, the woman is considered as if somebody who was supposed to bring a chatos and died. Tosfos is a slightly different version. Tosfos says because the fact that accepting an Tosfos says instead of the loy tzricha kapara, it's the tzricha kapara. She actually does need to repent. Why does she need to repent? Because the famous Rabbi Eliezer, right? Rabbi Eliezer says anyone who accepts to become an nazir is a sinner. So there's some sort of sin there for accepting an nazir, even though it was nullified, and therefore to the extent that that's a sin, the chatas is still valid, and therefore, but you can't bring it because ultimately you're not a nazir, so therefore it's killed. Okay, Tashma, Ha'isha shenadra b'nazir, a woman who accepts to bring a nazir. She was drinking wine, or she was becoming tamei. Harezu sefeges es ha'arbon. She gets malchus. Okay, 1 second. 1 second. Okay. So a woman's drinking wine, she's becoming tamei, she gets malchus, which is kind of obvious, right? If a man is a nazir and he walks into a cemetery, you're going to whip him. He gets malchus, the standard violation of a chayv lavin. Like, why would I think you wouldn't get malchus? If you just like you eat pig, you get malchus. And same thing is true if a person who's a nazir becomes tamei or drinks wine. Hechidami, what's the scenario there? If it's a scenario where the husband did not nullify the vow, so is there a reason to tell me that if a person violates a lav, a standard negative commandment, the normal penalty is malchus? It's obvious. Elapshita, it must be the hefer labal, that the husband actually nullified the vow. The isakadai, if you'll tell me, baalmi ekar okar, he revokes the naziris retroactively. So why do you get malchus? If it's retroactive, turns out she never sins. Elav shmamina, it must be baal megas gayas, that the husband abrogates the neder henceforth, and therefore even though from now forward, it turns out she's not actually a Nazira, but because at the time she sinned, she was a Nazira, she gets Malchus. And that's the Kiddush of the Mishnah. And this clearly supports the opinion that says Megas Gaius. The husband abrogates the neder henceforth. Gemara says no proof. I'll tell you, the truth of the matter is the husband revokes the neder retroactively. Okay. And it's because of the end of the Mishnah. Let's explain in a moment. So what does the end of the Mishnah say? Hey for labayla, the hila yada. Let's say the husband ends the neder, but she didn't know about it. The husband, let's say, for example, what happened, a likely scenario of this would be that the woman makes a nazirus, the husband didn't realize, and at some point, somebody else told him the wife is a nazir, is a nazira. So he said, my wife is a nazira mefer, it's done. I'm revoking it. And she didn't know. And that same day she drank wine. So what's the story? She does not get malchus. Okay. Now, because in this scenario, just give me a second here. Okay, I'll explain this in a moment. Now, what's the chiddush here? The chiddush here is that according to Rabbi Yehudah, you get malchus maridus for this. In other words, if you think in other words, when she was drinking wine, she thought she was committing a sin. Because she didn't know that. So Rabbi Yehudah says, even though technically speaking, you didn't actually sin, but because you thought you were sinning, we're going to give you malchus anyway. Basically, what's malchus maridus? They hit you until you say, I made a mistake and I'm going to do true. Hopefully it's only once. Okay. So therefore, okay. Now, because in the end of the Mishnah, it says you do not get malchus, and not like the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. In other words, even though she thinks she sins, even though she thinks she sinned, but she still does not get malchus. So that's why the first part of the Mishnah says she does get malchus. But it's true, it is obvious. It's not necessary to say. Okay, so let's wrap this up briefly. So the question of the Gemara, which we'll deal with again tomorrow, is whether the husband revokes the neder retroactively or not. We had questions from our Mishnah, two questions, and we concluded that in our Mishnah, the two reasons why the husband cannot revoke a neder that he was matfis from his wife is because he hatfasa from your wife's neder is in effect affirming it. And then we had the other brises that pointed to another brise that pointed to the fact that her chatas stays valid. We said that brise is not true either, because the fact that her chatas remains valid, even though maybe the husband, the neder is actually revoked retroactively, is because accepting Naziris is itself a sin. Okay, stop here.